In this video, we'll be going over definite and indefinite articles in Spanish. Now, first, let's talk about what that exactly means. Definite basically just means the ways to say the in Spanish, and indefinite means the ways to say a, an, or some in Spanish. Now, the reason why they're called definite and indefinite articles is because definite, meaning that we're talking about something specific, right? Something defined. So, if I were to say the pen, we're talking about just this pen, versus indefinite would be something more general, something that's not defined. So like a pen, something very general, right? And so these are the ways that you're going to say them in Spanish. First, let's start with the forms of the. There's going to be four of them. There's el, la, los, and finally las. Now, it seems a little weird to us English speakers that there's four forms of the, but it starts to make sense once you kind of take a look at how the Spanish language functions. Essentially, these are always going to be paired with a noun when we're looking at them in the context of definite articles. And because of that, the noun is going to have a lot of influence on which one you're going to use. So el is known as the masculine and singular version. La is known as the feminine singular version. Los is known as the masculine plural version. And finally, las is known as the feminine and plural version. So what do each of these mean? Well, if you watched my video on nouns and gender, you'll know that nouns essentially are categorized as four groups. It can be masculine singular, masculine plural, or feminine plural. Masculine essentially means that we're talking about a guy or a guy object. And so it's a little bit weird, but in Spanish, it just so happens to be that the objects also have gender and the places. And so while in English, when we are saying it in reference to an object, there is no it. Everything's either a him or a her. Everything's a he or a she. It's almost like everything is personified, right? And so things that end in O tend to be masculine. Things that end in A tend to be feminine. So for example, if I were to say el carro, that would mean the car. But if I were to say mesa, I could not say el mesa. That can't be. It would have to be la mesa, if that makes sense. And so essentially what we're looking at, things that end in A are going to be feminine, things that end in O are going to be masculine. And while there are other endings, these are the most common ones. So you can see that the form of the is going to get influenced by exactly the noun that we're talking about. Now if we make these plural, it can be los carros or las mesas. Now another thing too that we can look at is we can look at people. So for example, if I were to say camarero, which means waiter, say el camarero, but if I wanted to say the waiter in reference to a female waiter, la camarera. So you can see how this is going to change, and with this change we'll bring the change in the form of the. And so overall, the form of the that we are using is going to get influenced based on whether what we were talking about is quote-unquote masculine or quote-unquote feminine, and then whether it's singular, meaning there's one of it, or whether it's plural, meaning there's many of it. Now, getting down into a, an, and some, the indefinite articles, essentially going to be the same logic that we're using with these. So for now, we're going to say un, una, unos, and unas. So un and una meaning a or an. Now the interesting thing in English is that the rule with this is if something starts with a vowel, it's going to be an. If not, it's going to be a. But in Spanish, the difference between un and una is going to be if something is masculine or if something is feminine. And then we're looking at some, unos and unas. It can also be said as algún and algunas, and you'll probably hear that a little bit more. But for the sake of indefinite articles, these are the ones that we're looking at today. And so these are going to both mean some right here. And so it's going to use the same logic where if we take, let's say if we take all these things down, los carros, if we want to say some cars, unos carros. If we want to say one car or a car, un carro. Same thing here, unas mesas, some tables. If we want to say one table or a table, una mesa. And then if we look here, a waitress, una camarera. We're going to say a waiter, un camarero. So overall, you can see that they're working the exact same way as definite articles. There's just a bit of a difference in the way that we translate it, in which these are going to be more general, this is going to be more specific. Translating to the up here, and translating to a, an, or some down here. Now, there is one common misconception that I did want to cover, which is the idea that we use the word uno in order to mean one. Now, uno does mean one, but it depends on the context, because sometimes we have to use un. Uno only means one when it is not used in conjunction with another noun. So for example, if I wanted to say one car, I could not say uno carro. That's not what they say. They say un carro, un carro. But if I wanted to say, let's say I have one, in reference to a car, you could say yo tengo uno. And so essentially, the rule with this is that uno only gets used when we're not using it in conjunction with that noun. So carro cannot be next to it when we use it. As long as carro is not there, it's fine to use it. Another thing too is it can mean one in the sense of just when we're counting, right? That's why we say uno, dos, tres, cuatro, so on and so forth, and not un, dos, tres, cuatro. And so this is a very common misconception. I hear people use this wrong a lot anytime that we're talking about one. If we're talking about one and we're referencing a specific object or a specific noun, we have to say un instead of uno.